Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third session in Making the Jump to Managed Services. Today, we're going to be talking about staffing and operations for managed services delivery with our instructor and host, Dave Wilkerson, and we'll be joined a little bit later by David Iannetta. So I am not Robert Wilburn, as you can probably hear. My name is Tracy Frottier, and I am the Global Customer Marketing Manager here at SolarWinds MSP. Next week, we're going to be talking about sales and marketing, and that will wrap up our four-course sessions. So before we get started, just a couple of things to remind you all. You are muted right now. We would love it if you would turn your cameras on. This is meant to be very interactive. So if you have questions, instead of using the Q&A panel or the chat panel, just unmute yourself and interrupt Dave and ask him your question live and in real time. That's the way we like this to flow. This is not a webinar, and we don't want it to be a webinar. We want this to be very interactive so that you guys walk away with the most information possible. So I'm happy to introduce and pleased to introduce your host today, Dave Wilkerson, who is the CEO of MSP Advisor. He has loads of experience in the MSP space. He works with very small to very large MSPs, and he's been very successful building his own MSP from Avara to 80 people. So I'm going to stop now, turn it over to Dave. And remember, if you have any questions, unmute yourself, ask your question. If you can't unmute, you are free to use the chat panel, and I'll speak up on your behalf.
Thanks, everybody, and welcome back again to session 3. So we're going to keep on trucking. This is I think the most fun session for me because this is the one that I spend the most time with and in on my consulting practice. So this is good. Tracy went over all of these things, so we're good there. And again, session 4, which is next week, is going to be over metrics, sales and marketing, and QBRs. So we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. So here is our big takeaway for today's session that I really want to get across. And if you don't take anything else away, this is what you need to take away from this. And that is that efficient processes are critical to making money as a managed service provider. Another way to state that is it's very difficult to make money if you do things the way you do things as a VAR. With a VAR, we do a lot of different things on a day-to-day basis, a week-to-week basis, a month-to-month basis. We're doing different projects. We're working with different clients and so forth. With managed services, what we're really trying to do is kind of the same thing over and over again. It's much more analogous to kind of a traditional enterprise type of IT operation, and it requires a kind of a shift in thinking that's important. A lot of times with projects and time and material, we are doing things by brute force, meaning, we're doing half of it because we have a plan, and then the next 20%, we're just kind of figuring it out because this curveball got thrown to us, and this went wrong, and this happened, and this we didn't see coming, and so forth. We really can't do that as a managed service provider. The other thing to remember too, as we've talked about in the past couple sessions, is what we're really selling is with managed services is predictability to the client. And so having those processes and being efficient about them really are the only two ways that we can kind of drive that predictability from an organizational level. Things that really drives or that really shows as you kind of grow as a managed service provider is your operational maturity. And that's really kind of the measure of how efficient you are in your processes. And so when we talk about this idea of operational maturity, service leadership, which we've talked about in the past, they're that organization that worldwide has absolutely the best data on our industry. So they collect data every quarter and have been doing that for I think like 20 years. So they've got really good data from around the world on managed service providers. And you can see this is kind of an example of 3 different types of $2 million revenue managed service providers. That middle one, so the one right there in the center here, that is kind of the middle 2 quartiles. So the bottom 25% to top 75% in terms of profitability are those middle 2 quartiles. And on average, that middle 2 quartile is making on average 9% on their revenue, or $174,000 in American dollars. The right one is that bottom quartile. So this is the bottom 25% in terms of profitability. And you can see on average, they're making almost nothing. I think it's 1% or something like that, if I remember right. Where we want you to be is that left one. That's our best in class. That's the top 25% of the managed service providers. And this is what I target when I work with my clients to try and get them into that best in class area. They are on average making 18% or $368,000. So double what the 2 middle quartiles are making. And really, it's operational maturity, which is just another term for how efficient they are in their operations as to whether or not that, what quartile they're in. Anybody have any questions on that? Comments, thoughts? Okay. So here's my big concept with respect to efficiency. I believe the secret to efficiency is simplicity. What I've seen in my practice and in my experience has been the more complicated you make something, and you do it with the idea that you want to be efficient, you make it so complicated that you lose the efficiency. So I think. So if nobody has a question. So the efficiency or the simplicity is what kind of, I think, drives some of that idea of efficiency. And I think the idea there, by the way, is to kind of create processes, knowing what you know, create kind of the simplest process you can come up with, and then iterate. So as you find that where that process doesn't work, you iterate into new kind of versions of that process. So today's objectives are we're going to go through teams and staffing for managed service provider operations, how to share staff between business units, delivering services with a help desk, the tool sets that are required to be an MSP, and then again, the criticality of processes, efficiency, and automation. So we're going to talk about all that. So the first hurdle we run into as a MSP is exactly how to staff. And what you'll find quickly is that how you staffed before to be a VAR, to deliver, break, fix type of products is not really the same way that you need to staff to deliver managed services. So there, I like to think of service delivery in terms of teams. And I think this is one of the mistakes that new MSPs make, is that they don't think about these teams. They kind of just think about techs, and they think about those techs delivering various services. One of the important things, in my opinion, is you need to start kind of putting the pieces of services, of your company in general, into one of these 4 buckets. The help desk team, which is going to be our reactive team. So these are the people that are dealing with the inbound issues coming from the client, coming from your Rmm tool. They're dealing with those things and resolving those issues. Your NOC, which is your proactive team, they're the ones dealing with kind of the behind the scenes, day-to-day operational checking and improvement. So they're the ones checking to make sure backups are running and potentially, looking at that and fixing those things. They're the ones that are looking at whether or not devices are patching and potentially, dealing with patch issues on the back end. They're the ones that are tweaking your RMM. So they're dealing with the proactive things. They're trying to fix things before they become problems. Your field service team is going to be your on-site portion of your managed services operations. So they're going to provide both proactive and sometimes reactive services. And remember, we talked about this last week, where we want to try and schedule on-site as opposed to delivering on-site services as on demand, unless it's an emergency. So typically, this is going to be a scheduled type of a thing where we go on-site. And then finally, pro services, which is what your existing VAR techs are doing. That's going to be your billable work, so your project work, your time and material work. That's separate. And the interesting thing, and we'll get into this some as we go along. Each one of these things, if you really think about it, each one of these teams has a different priority. I like to say it serves a different master, right? So professional services, that billable work, the number one thing we want out of those team members is billable hours. So how many billable hours can they do? Help desk, we really don't care about how many billable hours they do. What we care about are outcomes for help desk. We care about whether they're getting to the inbound tickets within a certain period of time, whether they're resolving those tickets within a certain period of time, and whether they're making clients happy throughout that process. The NOC team, that's really about, are they doing those daily checks? Are they going through those things on a daily basis, staying up with those things? Having a cadence around that. And then again, field service, that's about being on site in a scheduled type fashion and doing checklists and potentially resolving some issues maybe that the help desk couldn't do remotely, and resolving that desk side. So if you start to think about these teams in terms of what our outcomes look like and how we're making them accountable for what they do, it starts to make sense that potentially, we need different people in those teams. Now, obviously, especially when you're small, that's difficult. And I put my own little quote up there. There's always a built-in excuse when there's no clear responsibility. So the problem is when you have a tech and you tell that tech, listen, you're going to go do billable work and you're going to work on the help desk, and you don't really control that situation, then they're always going to have an excuse. If they don't have enough billable time and you call them out on it, they're going to say, well, I had these tickets for managed services. If they're not getting to those managed services tickets in an efficient manner and resolving those things, they're going to tell you, well, I had a bunch of billable work. You've got to take those kind of built-in excuses out, and to do that, you can't approach things in an ad hoc fashion. And by ad hoc, I mean, you can't just say, okay, you're doing all of these things. You need to be much more, you need to be much more clear and defined as to what role they're in. So I suggest using a more scheduled approach. So for example, maybe you schedule the tech to work professional services on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you have them work on the help desk on Tuesday and Thursday, or maybe they're working help desk in the morning and they're working professional services in the afternoon. Some sort of a schedule and a regimen around that, so that while they're in a particular role, you can make them accountable to the outcomes that we want when they're in that role. So I think that's really important. Another thing to think about as you move forward is role switches always negatively affect your efficiency. So by role switches, I mean when I switch between being a professional services engineer and being on the help desk, that role switch affects the efficiency of that operation. So, and a perfect example, and I see this all the time. So you've got a tech and they do professional services and managed services. So let's say they're working on a project. Let's say they're working on an Active Directory migration. And in the middle of that, in rolls a ticket. They have to stop working on that project, kind of switch hats, switch their brains over, and work through whatever issue rolled in on the managed services side of things. Maybe that takes 45 minutes, and then switch back. That switching back and forth probably wasted about a half an hour, I would say, just to kind of do that switch. So it's just not efficient, and it's important that you look at ways to keep people in roles for a period of time. Does that all make sense? Do you have any questions about that, or comments or thoughts? Has anybody run into this issue where they've tried to kind of put somebody in a role, in an ad hoc role, and run into issues with that?
Yeah, we do that now, and some of our people can switch quickly and roll with it, and others have a real mental issue doing that.
Yeah. Some of it is a mental block, but some of it is just. So when you do that, do you have them sort of controlling themselves, so they're responsible for kind of the whole thing, and they have to figure out when to switch?
Normally it's me knocking them off balance where something has popped up that needs to be handled, so I'll approach a person, hey, can you stop what you're doing and do this instead?
Yeah, like a dispatch type thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But one question I have is, what are your thoughts on outsourcing help desk? Good idea or bad idea, especially if you're small?
Yeah, I would say that I've seen both success at that. So I have dealt with people that swear by it, especially when you're small. I think as you grow, it doesn't make a lot of financial sense, but when you're small, it might. But I've also heard some nightmare stories about that. So I think it has less to do with whether it's a viable option and more to do with who you have do it. I think there's good ones out there and bad ones out there. The good ones, the big thing with them is the onboarding. They spend a ton of time, getting to understand your processes and your clients. And, so if you've got well-documented processes that go along with that, you kind of hand it to them and say, here's how we do things. Usually I think there's more success. A lot of small companies don't do that. A lot of them don't have a lot of that in writing. It's all kind of in their head, which is kind of one of the things that I preach against. Like get it down and write it down, and that helps a lot. So, but I think as you grow, it gets hard.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this kind of leads me to another kind of discussion. Hopefully, I can get some people to weigh in. So what is your thought about whether every tech is suited to every team? Because this I think goes to the heart of I would say probably the biggest thing that I see in all of my clients is that they don't really grasp kind of the thinking behind the mentality of techs as they join some of these teams. Does anybody have any thoughts on whether or not every tech is suited to every team?
Mark Allison here. Through the evolution of our business, we've gone through 20 years of experimentation, if you will, and certainly seeing that there's a certain tech that does a great job somewhere, and maybe not so great somewhere else. And actually, we try to give them that choice to ask them, what do you prefer to do? Do you want to be in front of the client, on a daily basis, where a lot of people feel that they actually thrive there, that relationship, having a bit of a kind of a standard day, knowing where they're going to be at any hour on any week and any day. And some people, they prefer the service desk where it's random. You never know what you're going to get. but they prefer to be, out of sight, not necessarily out of mind. But and they thrive in different scenarios. And I think you've got to let them be their best person by allowing them to maybe even choose a role or at least evolve into a role. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, and I think that's exactly the line of thinking and kind of awareness of the teams that you've got to adopt. Good story from my MSP. I had a gentleman that had worked for the VAR for years and years and years and years, and he had never really. He was not the kind of guy that really wanted to go out and get certifications and all that stuff. I mean, he was a solid tier 2 engineer, but he was not the slightest bit interested in, say, virtualization. He wasn't really interested in, all of the cloud stuff. He liked what he liked, and that was it. And we found that he was starting to kind of lie about his time at clients. So we were getting reports that maybe he wasn't there when he said he was there. So we questioned him. He had some excuses. So we ended up bringing him in and putting him on the help desk, mostly because we wanted to keep an eye on him because he was, MIA from the clients occasionally. And what we found is he really, really excelled sitting at the help desk, having a set schedule. He was on time every day, but boy, the end of the day happened. As soon as his ticket was done, near his time to go home, he was out the door. Normally, in a professional services type organization, employee, because what I hear a lot is, well, not motivated or whatever. When you're talking about a help, where you're just, especially at the lower tiers, where you're just, kind of a mentality is not necessarily a bad. You got to progress technically, but they're not. Somebody that's meticulous and scheduled like that, and it shows up on time, is there for their shift, that's much more the kind of employee that's suited for that help. And a lot of times in a VAR, you don't really have anybody like that because you just like that. And so you stick them on the help desk and they're miserable. So that role is a lot of times more suited to somebody that's in a more traditional kind of enterprise help desk role that you might have over as a VAR. So it's really critical to start really be the personalities. As Mark said, you've got the people maybe that are not so personable that we've got in our industry. Maybe they do really well in the proactive side of things, where they're really not dealing with clients too much. They're more dealing just with conversations kind of behind the scenes. A lot of that proactive work we love into the evening or night. We used to do our proactive team. The shift would start at 2 p.m. and they would work, later into the evening. That way they can get reboots and things like that done. So there is some interesting thinking when you think about these teams as you start to build them out, just looking for people that maybe you wouldn't normally look for. Anybody else have any comments on that before we move on, or thoughts? Okay. So hurdle number 2, how do we deliver help desk services? There's really 3 models. The first one is kind of what Mark just was talking about, and that's the dispatch model. If you think of that as kind of somebody that is the puppet master, right? So they're looking at the tickets, they're deciding who would be the best fit to work on those tickets, and they're handing out those tickets. So all day long, they're orchestrating the ticket flow. The problem with that is that, you can't scale that. It's very difficult to scale that dispatch model. It works okay when you're small, but it's hard to scale. Plus, people need vacation. So if your dispatcher's on vacation, there's going to be a change, I guess, in service. The second model, which I find is the more mature model, is a triage model. A triage model is one where the tickets are triaged by the team as part of the process to resolve the ticket. So you don't have a particular person that's kind of figuring out who should work on a ticket. It's the triager will look at the ticket, decide what the level of severity is, potentially call the client for more information, and then they will put it in a queue, and then the technicians will pick up that ticket. This is the model that you see in like Cisco's tech support, HP's technical support, Dell's technical support. It's more of a triage type model. The third, and this is kind of an outlier, but I see it occasionally being used, is what's called the pod model, or I call it a dedicated team model. And that's a model where you assign a team of tier 1, 2, and 3 engineers to a set of clients. So you have this set of clients, they only deal with this pod of technicians. The people that use this swear by it and love it. I think it's more difficult, and I think it's more expensive to do, because when you reach capacity, you basically got to build a whole new pod for one client and then grow into that and then build a new pod. So it's scalable. And I would guess that for the most part, clients would be happier in this model, but it's definitely more difficult and more expensive to do. But it is out there. So that's kind of an outlier that I wanted to throw out. And again, some of this is philosophical, right? I mean, there's a philosophical driver behind that pod model of, fewer techs working with clients will make the clients happier. So they feel closer to those techs, and the techs feel closer to the clients. So the techs get to know the clients.
Sorry, I just want to remind everybody, if you have a question, please go ahead and unmute yourself and do what I just did. Interrupt Dave. This is meant to be very interactive. Yep. If you have a lot of background noise behind you, or you can't get your mic to unmute, please go ahead and use the chat function, and then I'll act as the asker of the question for you. Okay?
Yeah, and I keep an eye too on that chat window. So.
Awesome.
Okay. Anybody have any comments or questions about those three models? I don't really. I mean, those are the three most common. There really aren't any other models that I'm aware of really out there. Anyone? Mark, you started to say something, I think, or you coughed. One of the two.
From my experience, if you have small team, then you can have the problem where, for example, there's a ticket coming in from one customer, and the other technician would not take the ticket because usually that other guy is doing that problem. Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that that the clients prefer a particular technician? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of islanding clients, that's really, really, really bad. And it's very typical. You see it a lot in small companies because it's so small. The companies are so small. If you've got 3 or 4 employees, that clients just like to work with a particular tech. It's really, really hard to break clients of that. So I would strongly recommend that you try to get away from that as early as possible. Otherwise you have that situation where technician A is getting texted in the middle of the night, and if technician A is out of commission for whatever reason, that client's issues are falling on deaf ears. So having at the very least, having kind of trying to break that, one-to-one relationship is really important. The other thing that happens that will bite you is the technicians will leave a company and take clients with them because the bonds are so strong, client to employee. So that's something you really want to watch out for as you move forward and try to break. So
just a quick question on the triage model.
Mm-hmm.
When the help desk is looking at all the tickets and they're determining priority levels and so on, but then they when somebody needs to go on site, for example, they are determining that through the service desk themselves, or is that being prioritized by somebody more senior? We have a dispatcher.
Yeah. Usually you have dispatchers in the pro services regardless. I mean, it's hard.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard. For professional services and project work, you need either a project manager, a dispatcher, somebody that's still pulling the strings. So so we're just talking really about the help desk piece. When a ticket needs to be worked on site, kind of the two options are, one, you've got a dedicated field service person or persons, so that they're the ones that go on site and you have a schedule around that. So that's one way to do it. Some companies, especially when they're smaller, will use their professional services team to do that work. And then it's a matter of that escalation goes to the dispatcher for professional services, and then they schedule that on-site work.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this graph here, graphic here, shows you kind of the growth model that I see kind of as you grow or mature. And the ones in dark blue, those are all dispatcher based. The ones in green are triage based, and then that call sorting model that's kind of in the middle is sort of a blend of the two. So we'll just kind of go through this. So that ad hoc model, that's the one that we really need to get out of. And that's the idea that, it's just kind of every man for himself or woman. Everybody's working everything. As you kind of grow, you get into this hybrid model where you've got a dedicated MSP resource. And when I say dedicated MSP resource, that might be a half person. So you might not have a full employee dedicated to managed services, but you have some portion of their time carved out and scheduled and dedicated to managed services only. And then in a hybrid model, you've got then the other people still jumping in and providing additional service. So it's kind of ad hoc with these other resources. Dedicated with augmentation, that's where you have dedicated MSP resources, and then occasionally you're augmenting with your time and materials team. So occasionally they're coming in and they're working not as an escalation point, but as kind of a member of the team. And there's really a difference. An escalation should only really occur in a mature model to a tier 3 outside resource. Example, let's say that I'm supporting Exchange in my managed services operation. Well, typically your Exchange expert is really a professional services engineer because they're doing Exchange projects. They're deploying that, although we're not doing that quite as much anymore, or at all anymore. But just for sake of example, so it doesn't make sense to have your Exchange engineer permanently inside of your managed services team. So typically, if we kind of go through all of our resources and they can't resolve a particular Exchange issue, we'll escalate outside to our professional services person. And again, that's different than augmenting with professional services where they're jumping in and working. Next kind of step is dedicated tiered. That's where we've got a dedicated team and they are in a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 type of a situation. But again, in that model of dedicated tier, we have a dispatcher who's assigning tickets to people. So he or she is telling Johnny, the tier 2 engineer, this is your ticket, you need to work this. The next is where we start to get into more of a triage model. I call it the call sorting model. and that's one where we've got tickets flowing to the teams. Typically, the dispatcher's touching all those tickets, so maybe they're kind of acting as a triager. They're acting as a short circuit to get some tickets to certain people, but then they're also just generally throwing things into a queue and letting the techs pick them up. So that's kind of that blended model. And then on to Gatekeeper, that's where you have true triager, tier 1, and then a tier 2, tier 3 group. And the triager just is not very technical usually. Usually they're either very green or just very customer service oriented and not really technical. And they're just looking at the details of the ticket. So they're working through kind of a workflow to kind of determine whether or not something is a high severity or low severity. Maybe they're asking particular scripted questions of the client to help figure that out. They're making sure that the data is there, that the details are there, telephone number, all of that, that the subject line on the ticket is good. And then it's going on, and the tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 techs are picking those tickets up in the order that they are received and the severity that they are. And then the last model is this idea, it's the most sophisticated, and I call it the multi-level service model. And that's where you've got triagers actually working some tickets. You have clear tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 levels with engineers in each one, technicians in each one, and you've got a very defined escalation process and so forth. So this is going to be the most mature type of model for help desk. So my guess is most of you are probably somewhere in that top section of this, but this is kind of how we want to work through the process and how we want to kind of grow our help desk as we go. Does anybody have any questions about that? I know it can be a little bit confusing. Okay. So what tools do we need to kind of deliver these things? So your stack really is more than just delivering services. You know, you have to kind of create this stack around what it is that you are delivering, and there's kind of some core tools that we have. And by the way, just as a reminder, I'm not a SolarWinds employee, so I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm trying to kind of just talk generally about what those products are that are out there. I would say the most core product that you need is your PSA or professional services automation software. That, you know, the big player in the industry is ConnectWise Manage. So that's kind of the traditional ConnectWise product. So that's going to give you your ticketing. It's going to give you your billing. It's going to give you your reporting around those things, your agreement billing. So that's, you know, the consumption of the labor into the agreement and the tracking of your costs and so forth. A lot of times it also includes or optionally includes procurement. So your product purchasing, your purchase orders, your inventory, all of that stuff is typically in there as well. And, you know, that's going to feed your accounting software typically. Next is the Rmm Tool. So that's your remote monitoring and management software. So that's what you're going to use to, you know, monitor all your managed devices, remote control those devices, you know, be able to what's going on, take proactive action against those, run scripts and so forth, schedule them to run after hours, all of those things. That's going to be your RMM piece. And typically your RMM and your PSA integrate. So the data is flowing back and forth between these two pieces of software. And that's really critical that all of these things work together, because if you lose efficiency when that doesn't occur. A documentation tool is important, and there's lots of ways to do that. And I've been through lots of iterations of that. I mean, one of the things that I'm really happy about our industry lately, say over the past 4 years, 5 years, is that there are a number of, kind of dedicated documentation tools in the market now, because I think that really provides a framework for MSPs to really do a nice job with documentation. Before, when I got into this, we were using SharePoint and Word documents and, folders on file servers, and it's very difficult to do that. It's very hard to keep track of things and to make sure everybody's putting the information in that you need and that they're keeping it up to date. These documentation tools are good because they kind of provide that framework for you, and they also provide you with the ability to kind of audit the documentation and make sure that that stuff is there. And they all integrate back to the PSAs, which is also important. And mostly they integrate with the RMM as well. I call this the minimum viable security suite. So, having kind of that standard minimum that you're going to have all of your clients use, I think is really important for a whole lot of reasons. I guess first and foremost is just liability. You want to create a situation where you're protecting your clients, you're using best practices to protect your clients, or you're going to get sued. So I think at minimum, you're looking at an antivirus or endpoint detection and response type software, spam protection, patch management, and backup. To me, that's kind of the bare minimum. A lot of companies are adding a lot more to that. We talked, I think, last week about kind of some of the things that fall into that, but establishing what you consider the minimums is really important for security, and really talking about that to your clients, making that part of your sales pitch and so forth. That's really, I think, an important thing, making sure that's on every managed device. And then optional in the beginning is some sort of a metrics display. There's a lot of those tools out there. BrightGauge is one of probably the biggest one that's out there. There are others as well, but it's the idea of putting something up on a TV, a big monitor, and putting it out in front of your techs, in front of your salespeople, in front of you, your dispatcher, that in a glance will let you see how you're doing. So figuring out what those metrics are and putting them up will become important as you grow, because it makes everyone accountable to that kind of growth and the things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So that's really important. Again, integration, that's one of the things that you have to look for. Another thing to remember is these things are this software, everything that you see here is very difficult to change once you get a number of clients on them. So, when you've got 5,000 or 6,000 endpoints on your RMM, changing to a different RMM is just an unbelievably difficult task. When you have, years of information in your PSA, tickets and clients and agreement setup and those kinds of things, it's just hugely tough to get rid of that PSA. So you really need to make sure you're making good decisions right out of the gate. Documentation, same way. Once you get all that documentation in there, getting it into another tool is really difficult. The security suite, that's movement inside of the security suite's a little more typical. A lot of people will change AVs over the course of time, change backup platforms, those sorts of things. So you see more of that, but still, anything that you change is going to take up a bunch of time. None of it's going to be billable, and there's just a lot of work there. So just be very, very diligent as you're looking at what tools you're putting in your stack as you go forward. Anybody have any questions about the stack and any of that?
Do you have any preference tool what you're using for documentation?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is there's a couple out there that are really good. One of them is the SolarWinds documentation tool. It's part of Passportal. Another one is IT Glue, which is a really nice tool, especially if you're using ConnectWise because of the way it integrates. There's a lot of them out there, but my only big recommendation is I would recommend getting an industry documentation tool as opposed to kind of either an IT documentation tool, because you see some of that out there, or just a kind of a generic documentation tool. I've got a couple of clients that use, one of them uses Confluence. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's a Linux-based tool. It's not particularly for our industry, but it works. It works, but they lose out on, some of that framework and audit that is built into documentation tools that are really built for our industry. And they're in a situation, this particular client is in a situation where, it just doesn't, it's so much work to change it at this point. They're just living with the fact that some of the things that they could be doing if they had a different platform, they could do. So you've painted yourself into a corner at that point. So my probably number one thing to recommend is pick something that's built for our industry, that's multi-tenanted, and that has, that framework for us that really fits our delivery methods.
Dave, is there a formula for how much we should be spending on these tools? We're in Canada and using ConnectWise, which is US based. So we are affected by the dollar, and COVID was no friend to us in terms of the exchange rate. So we found the price obviously fluctuating, but in my mind, I just think this is a lot of money to be spending on, it's obviously a key application for us, but is there a percentage of revenue or some kind of other model that you can recommend that, if you're paying more than X number of dollars, then, something's wrong?
Yeah, so it should be your hard costs. So your hard costs are everything: PSA, RMM, a fraction of your documentation tool, the AV, the backup, all that stuff should be around 15% of your product. So for every dollar of managed services that you bill, it should be around 15 cents of that dollar. So then within that 15 cents, now you've got to figure out kind of how to dole all of that out, piece all that out. What's the exchange rate now for Canada? Just out of curiosity.
It was 1.4.
Wow.
I think it's still around there. Yeah. So we take a beating when things are going badly for Canada. So
yeah. Yeah. I guess they got to open up the border so I can go up there and spend some money in Toronto.
You should. You bet.
Yeah. It hasn't been like that in years.
Lockdown. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's and it does fluctuate from bad to worse. So gone are the great days where we would get dollar at par and be able to go spend in the US.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised. I mean, ConnectWise, I believe, and I'm not 100% sure of this, but I believe that they kind of price around the country that they're in, but maybe they don't do that with Canada. At least that's what I had heard.
Yeah, they do, but it actually ends up being even more. So we're actually in negotiation with them right now to see if we can get a more palatable price at a fixed cost that we can budget to. So that's in the works. I just, to be honest with you, I've just found ConnectWise service to be less than ideal. It's a big organization and it's sometimes hard to get movement.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that, a lot of the companies suffer from that. But, my only observation of that is that ConnectWise is definitely the leader in what they're offering. Mm-hmm. So, when you're in that situation, sometimes you have to kind of give up. When you're the client to them, you kind of have to maybe give up some of the things that you want for, other things that you get. So,
right. And as you mentioned, a move to another product is a daunting task.
Yes,
we've looked into it, and I think it'd be a huge undertaking, and not, there's money and time down the drain that what would be better spent somewhere else. So kind of tied into it.
And many a debate about whether it's easier to move from a PSA platform to another one or an RMM platform to another one. And I've always said PSA is by far the most difficult and time consuming to switch out.
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult, and if you think about that, so back to that 15 cents per dollar, one of the things to consider is the way to make, to lessen the impact of a particular, of your PSA or whatever, something that's not per device, is, gain efficiency. So the more efficient you are, the more you're doing with a particular tech, right? Your PSA is licensed per tech. So if I can service more clients with one tech, then I've taken that price, that seat price for the PSA, and diluted it across more endpoints. So, that's what you've got to do. You've got to look at that, and on the flip side, you've got to look at the prices you're charging. If you're getting hammered on your fixed costs on the back end, you might have to raise your prices, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head there. Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Good insight.
Mm-hmm. Okay, how do I keep my labor costs in line? That's an apropos conversation after what we just talked about. So again, many MSPs manage 200 to 300 devices per tech. Best in class manage 1,000 devices per tech, and automation is the key differentiator. So again, that cost of PSA, like we just talked about, is X if per device. If you're only managing 300 devices, if I can get it up to 1,000, I've now divided that by 3. So it's 1/3 cheaper essentially per device. As we all know, salaries are our biggest expense. So, controlling those management or those labor costs are really critical to how profitable you are. And this is an interesting statement that I think you'd probably all agree with. If I got every single company, their techs in a room, and I asked them, do you guys have enough staff? I would say 9 out of 10 would say, no, we need more people. And it doesn't matter, if we look at the back end and look at the finances or whatever, it doesn't matter what the finances look like. That's going to be the response from your technicians. So knowing that you can't necessarily trust, I guess I'll put quotes around trust, the analysis of your techs, you need to really have other ways to do that, financially driven decision-making on when you need additional labor. But the key here is we've got to drive efficiency. We've got to make our techs more efficient, every day. We have to focus on that. Hiring cheap labor doesn't work. Real automation is the only way to keep the labor costs in check. So if you hire green people, which sometimes you need to do that, but if you hire green and you get too many of those green employees, what you end up with is overall worse service. So just hiring bodies in our industry does not work. However, one of the things to consider in managed services that I think is a key takeaway too is that this triangle, this pyramid of how techs kind of stack is important. And typically, just so we're all aware, in a professional service organization, this triangle is upside down, meaning normally we have more tier 3 techs, fewer tier 2 and fewer tier 1 in a typical professional services organization. When we do managed services, we've got mostly tier 1 techs, fewer tier 2 techs, and then fewer yet tier 3 techs. And then as we look at where automation fits in this, you know, that tier 1 side of things, there's tons of opportunities for automation. For example, just a really quick, easy one. If we want to reboot a computer, which we have to do a lot, right? We could either leave the tech, log in and hit reboot or whatever, or we could have an automation where we just click reboot that computer and it just happens. You know, that's just a really easy, simple example of an automation opportunity for those tier 1 techs. So it's quicker for them and it's much harder for them to screw up. So you know how easy it is when you're in Windows, you could accidentally click shut down instead of restart. Well, if you don't have somebody there to turn it back on and you hit shutdown, it's a real problem. If we limit that to restarts in automation, it's more difficult to kind of screw that up. Tier 2, you know, there's definitely still some automation opportunities. They're typically less at the tier 2 level, but certainly there's a lot there. And then the tier 3 techs, they're typically going to be more of your billable resources, and they typically own automation, meaning they're the ones that are setting up the scripts. They're the ones that are tweaking the scripts. They're the ones that are adding scripts. So they're your senior people, and they're typically kind of in charge of deploying the automation tools for your tier 2 and tier 1 techs. Question from Andre, 200 to 300 is for monitoring or also for delivery? So that's for the whole thing. So 200 to 300 endpoints per technician for managed services is kind of typical. And what we want to see is, you know, 1,000 or more, which is more in line with what best in class do. Okay, so at this point, we've got David Ionetta, and we have a theme, just so you know. I'm David, he's David. Next week, our speaker, our guest is David. So we have this, this cool theme going with David's. So David, if you want to pop in and just kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll have kind of a conversation. And
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Yeah, so I've been basically doing IT for over 22 years, and for 7 of those years, I was an MSP in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, so you pretty much did the gamut there. And about 10 years ago, I started out with GFI, and then I became Logic Now, and then we got acquired by SolarWinds. And I've been a sales engineer and also do a lot of internal training on the RMM. And one of the things I get passionate about, and especially hearing David talk about it, is automation to me is the biggest game changer, and it is the one that is absolutely, without a doubt, the one that is least taken advantage of. Can everybody see my screen here? Is it popping up?
Yep.
Good. Everything's cooperating today. So I do a lot of training, and I do a lot of dashboard, all kind of like a dashboard audit with my clients as a customer success manager. And I often see, more often than not, that these tasks, there's nothing here. So one of the things that I've noticed about automation is there's 3 key ways of running it and thinking about it. The first way is what I call like a trigger by event. So if I have a check looking at my background, for example, I can just have a service that's running. Like one of the popular ones would be someone has a QuickBooks service running on a server. So and those services tend to get knocked off by a backup or something like that on the weekend. Everybody comes in on Monday, can't log into QuickBooks, so they get a call. So they're waiting to get and do their job. Someone has to get onto the server and restart the service. There could just simply be a service check that says if it's not running, start it up again. And again, with that type of service, you could be charging for the result, not the time put in, because no time was put in. So that's kind of like a trigger by event. Another one would be looking through certain event logs. Sometimes we look into the event logs and we see issues that were caused, and we're trying to find something that says warning or error so we can kind of do our searches and find out how to fix it. We locate the fix, and maybe the fix is something like stop the service, delete the bloated log file, restart the service. So now if I have a check that looks for that warning, when it sees the warning, it triggers that script to run, and then it fixes the problem. And then the check runs through again and everything's clear. So one of the nice things about that is it's an environmental check. So it's something that I look at the things that I'm doing often and having to do often, and I say, can I automate this? Can I automate a way of discovering this issue before it becomes an issue? And can I automate a way of responding to that issue? So that would be more like a trigger by event. Another one way that I see that can become instantly handy is when it comes to the maintenance that has to be done on certain machines. So this would be more of a scheduled event, essentially something just like a workstation maintenance. I can go through and I can have my workstation maintenance, the different things I want to do on a machine once a week. A lot of times I talk to MSPs and they had the same experience that I had, where these types of tasks, when being done manually, are subject to fail because, first of all, people tend to work more on the billable items than the maintenance items, so they get pushed to the end of the month if they get done at all. And secondly, you start to skip things accidentally or on purpose just to get the task done and the checkbox checked. With a maintenance script or any type of scheduled script, it's done exactly the same way every single time. And it's done on schedule. It's done the way that it's supposed to be, and it's automated in that way. So that would be like the second method for using automation.
Just to interject.
Yes, sir.
So if you think about that, these are all things that are working without having a tech even involved. So when we just talked about that, getting from 300 to 1,000 devices, this is how you do it, right? I mean, you don't have techs sitting there, restarting services. You don't have 10 tickets to restart a service because your Rmm tool already did it. You don't have somebody sitting there, cleaning up hard drive directories. Your script did it.
That's exactly right. That frees up the technicians to be responding to the more immediate problems, the more one-offs and things like that. And I tell people, because the biggest complaint about automation is I don't have time to set it up. Every single automated task that you create is as if you've hired someone, taught them how to do something, and they will do it nonstop, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and they'll never ask for a paycheck. So if you don't have time to train an individual like that, that's how you have to think about this, because it seriously is the game changer. And most times someone will say, well, it'll take me an hour to create a script to do this. Let me just jump on that machine and do it in 5 minutes. Absolutely, that one's time, but that's not scalable. And that takes an individual, as David was saying, to do that task. If I can create a script, maybe it'll take me an hour, but I can put that same script on 1,000 machines, and it'll run on all 1,000 and moving forward, and getting tweaked every once in a while, as David mentioned, by the level 3 technicians.
And run exactly the same every time, like you said.
Yep, exactly the same, no mistakes, same order, just like that. I have done that where you've gone in to shut down a machine and restart a machine, and you're doing it remote, and you hit shutdown. And that one little mistake caused me a trip, and I eat the trip charge, I eat the time. Maybe I even have to get somebody on site early before they open to get me in the door, just by that one error. And then, of course, we know the types of things that can happen in this environment. And the final one, and this one I see probably people get heavier on the first two, but it's the manual run scripts. I've got a few simple ones in here just to kind of get you thinking about it. You're like, okay, yeah, I know if I just do renew DHCP, it's going to fix this problem, or flush DNS, or these several little things are going to fix the problem. If you have these manually run scripts, then that basically puts the technical expertise of a level 3 technician into the hands of a level 1, because now he can perform the steps by just right-clicking and running the script. All he needs to know is under what conditions do I run this script, and then it goes run in and right through. So those manually runs, it's almost like you have a toolbox here of essentially 3 different types of scripts. The trigger by event, let me look at the environment. If there's something like the print spooler, if I know that I have a pesky print spooler that's not working, I'm going to restart it. And then, hey, if it starts going up and down, then let me know about that. But if it stops, all I'm going to do is restart it. That's my trigger by event, and of course, getting more fancy with it, with scripts that when the environmental variables show, then the script runs to fix those problems. And the second one, of course, would be doing the maintenance scripts, the ones that I want to do on a weekly basis, monthly basis, that type of thing. And then finally, those manually run events is like a toolbox. And the more time you spend in here creating this and setting these up, this is scalable and repeatable. And I love the phrase, a culture of automation is the game changer. Because again, I have a lot of customers that say, well, you know, I charge by time. No, you're really charging by the end result. When I go into the dentist office and the dentist comes in and he spends 10 minutes actually touching my mouth and walks away, I don't say, hey, for 10 minutes, that's only this much of an hour. I should only have to pay you this. I'm paying for the result. And it's the same for us. They're paying for the results of these scripts and the time and the expertise it had to put into them. So absolutely, without a doubt, use automation. Think about it. Always looking at your cases and tickets and saying, could we have automated any of this? Could we have been proactively automated any of this? And that will absolutely be the game changer. That's all I have to say at this point.
Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And I think probably one of the most important things he said is you really got to make this, you know, the idea and part of your culture, that the idea that you're looking at these things, looking for places to automate, looking for things to automate. It's really a critical function, I guess, of what you're doing. That's the way to change. That's the way really to change the kind of paradigm or the continuum around how you deliver managed services. So let me just share. I don't think I'm sharing. Go. Chat window back real quick. Participant list. All right. So does anybody have any comments or thoughts about that? I don't know how many of you now have an RMM tool of some sort, and whether is anyone really working on automation now in their business? And we see it a lot, that they've got the tool and they just don't do the automation. That's why, you know, we spend a lot of time. I spend a lot of time talking about it. I know SolarWinds does as well, of how important it really is, because of how it really is the way to propel yourself into that best-in-class managed service provider.
Dave, we've been using ConnectWise, as I mentioned, and there's a lot of automation that I think we haven't been taking advantage of. So we actually have one of our team is very focused on improving the automation, and we're seeing a lot of value there. I think there's just so much more to explore and to take advantage of. So using your number of 1,000 end devices is fantastic, and you know, I expect a very upset group of techs when I try to throw that kind of number at them, because of course the numbers, the expectation is so much lower. And it's kind of interesting to hear your story, because it's so familiar about, you know, we need more people, we need to spend more money, whereas there's a lot of automation, a lot of efficiency that can happen at a nominal cost, and it's a great investment for the future. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Well, and another thing just to remember that happens, you know, it's hard. It's easy to throw a person at something. You know, I'm too busy. I have too many tickets. I've got backlog. The easy solution is throw a person at it. The hard solution, which is the right solution, is automating, becoming more efficient. You know, that's hard. And telling people you're not going to hire somebody when they're kind of going crazy is hard. I've been through it. I've been through it with my clients. I've had to do, rah-rahs with their employees. I've flown to my clients to kind of, get their techs excited about this. It really is hard. And so, if you're just starting out in this, if you can do this from the beginning, you're so much better off. And to David's point, you've got to look at it as an investment. You don't look at it as, oh, you know what, I don't have time to spend the hour right now. I can do it in 5 minutes. You've got to think about what's the right thing to do. How many times am I going to do this thing? Am I only going to do it once forever and it's going to be 5 minutes? Well, don't automate it. But is it something that I'm going to do 10 times a month? It's going to take me an hour to automate it. I mean, that's a no-brainer. You've got to do that. And also that tip about having what I call an automation czar, which is like the person in the company that is the champion for automation, owns the automation, is really a good best practice as you grow, having somebody in charge of that. Or somebody's, one of the things that I do is I'll have a person that rotates into that position. So you rotate a tech out for say 60 days, and all they work on is automation for that 60 days. It's change of pace, and it also gets them familiar with the tools, and you get a fresh look at that. So as you grow, that's a possibility. You've got to have quite a few techs to be able to do that, but that can work. So what are processes that are kind of critical to managed services? And again, as I've been saying, processes are what drives efficiency and predictability. I love this quote by Albert Einstein. If I had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes and only 5 minutes finding the solution. That is so true. Look at the big picture. Don't just get down in the weeds of fixing that particular thing. Look at the big picture of how can I do it efficiently and repeatedly. So if predictability is what we're selling, processes are really the only way to deliver that predictability. You can't do it. You can't deliver predictability unless you have people doing the same thing over and over again. If you've got techs that kind of come up with their own solutions every time, there's just no predictability in what you're delivering. It's really the only thing that allows you to scale. Again, that's really critical. We typically, when we're small, everything's about brute force. We just get it done. It just doesn't scale, because if you don't have the right person on that situation, brute force fails, it turns into a fire drill, and now it's, instead of having one tech involved, it's 2 techs, 3 techs, 2 techs, the owner and the salesperson all trying to run interference on the client, and it doesn't make for happy clients. But again, remember, most companies, if they're doing project work, there's a lot of this brute force stuff. Like, that is what we know. That's how we do things. And the better we are at kind of doing things brute force and not letting the clients know that we're kind of just making that project work, that's usually the hallmark of a good project company, but not good when it comes to managed services. And so that line of thinking definitely has to change. And again, we've been talking about this over and over. Throw it over to the employees and let them kind of figure. Even if you create, kind of an SOP for things, a standard operating procedure, you still get a lot of time waste. You get a lot of redundant work. You get a lot of, kind of conversations between techs to try and get things resolved. And then the one that kills me is just that idea of incomplete work. So you probably are all used to this. The techs get it to 90% and they don't finish it. There's always that 10% hanging out there. You see that all the time. And you see that all the time in managed services tickets where there's no process, where there's just tons of open tickets, and you start going through the tickets and there's tickets that are 3 months old and 2 months old. There's no way it's still broken, because if it is, your client would be freaking out. So you know it's resolved, but yet here it is. It was waiting for the tech to maybe reach out to the client or response from the client or whatever. You know, that it's just, that's what you get if you don't have those processes in place. And again, best-in-class MSPs are all hyper-focused on their processes. They think about their processes, they iterate through their processes to improve them, and it's a continuous improvement process to improve their processes. So just to kind of give you some ideas, what did it do? I hit the wrong button here, hang on. So just some examples of kind of critical processes. So I just kind of brainstormed some of the big processes that we see kind of universally in managed service providers. So tickets are worked within a predefined window based on a criticality. So that's what we call SLA adherence. So that idea that a ticket comes in, it's assigned some sort of criticality. So it's, you know, if it's a server down, it's a priority 1 ticket. If it's, you know, a person can't print this type of form, but they can to a different printer. So there's kind of a workaround there. It's only affecting 1 person. That's a pretty low priority ticket. So working those tickets within in a predefined or promised SLA window based on that criticality is kind of one of those key processes that you need to have inside your company. Tickets worked to completion and not stalling. That's kind of what I just referred to of, you know, having tickets that basically are resolved, but they're months and months old, but they're not closed. So having that process drive that, preventing a ticket from just getting stuck somewhere along the way, and making sure that that work continues, and tickets don't just get old sitting there unworked, that they actually get resolved. And if you have to escalate, that occurs within a timely manner or some sort of a scheduled way. So that's a process or processes that need to be inside an MSP. Onboarding, this is a huge one. When you bring on new clients, you should have a very detailed process for how that works, how you gather documentation, how you deploy your tools onto their systems, how you train their employees on who to call or how to contact you, how to get purchases approved. So all of that, you know, defining all of that is all part of the onboarding, and you know that's another one. You set that up as best as you can as your process, and then you iterate it. So, you know, you review that every so often. You look at it. What did I miss when I onboarded these 3 clients? What did I miss? Sit with your techs and look at that. What bit you after doing it, and you know, improve that process as you go forward. New devices added to your Rmm tool or deprecated devices being removed. That's another one. If I would go into most RMMs, I'll find devices that are offline, have been offline for months, years, whatever. You know, that process for removing them, the process for adding them, auditing this occasionally, that's all very important and critical to keeping your RMM clean and to doing the things that you kind of promised your clients that you would deliver. And then this is a big one. Invoicing changes when quantities change. So you deliver more Office 365 licenses or less, you need to be automatically or through some process updating your billing. If you're billing by user, managed service by user, and your client adds users, there needs to be a process for changing your invoicing. New devices, a process for changing your invoicing. I see this, I would say 80% of the time when I engage with a client, this does not happen. That there's no automatic way that this happens, no process that makes it happen. It's kind of just an ad hoc thing that they do. and they're always losing money because of it, because they're missing out on things that they should be billing. And then the other problem is once you go to clean up all of this, there's some significant changes to the client bills, and then they kind of freak out. And so if you do it regularly, it's not that big a deal. And then another one, documentation has changed as the environment changes. I'm sure that you're all acutely aware of this one, where your documentation does not match what the client network looks like. And it might be just minor differences, it might be major differences, but all of this, really kills efficiency. When a tech goes in there and they look up the documentation and it says that this and that server's there, or this server is serving DHCP, and then they're looking and that's really not what happened. And then they come to find out that, 4 months ago there was a project, moved servers or changed firewalls or whatever. I mean, you can see all that does is drive inefficiency. It just makes your labor costs go up. It makes your clients unhappy. It makes your employees unhappy. You got to have good processes around this kind of stuff. Customer approvals are sought per your agreement with the client. So again, if in some ways the client has to approve changes or charges, those kinds of things, changes in that, you've got to have some sort of process that makes that happen, according to whatever you've agreed to with your client. So again, these are processes that should be in every single managed service provider. And I would say that in most, there's some of these, but certainly not all of them. And these are just kind of, I don't know, like process 101 kind of things. Does anybody have any thoughts or other processes maybe that they think I missed that are like really common ones, for example? Any questions about these? Any thoughts about processes in general? Automation? Nothing? We're done with this week's session. Next week, we're going to have how to use metrics as a motivator, which I think is huge for our techs. What are some of those key managed services metrics? What do those look like? How to use QBRs to demonstrate value and sell services. Those are quarterly business reviews, as a reminder. And then we've got, again, another Dave. He's coming in as our guest to talk about sales and marketing. He's a sales and marketing guy, has worked for an MSP. He owned his own MSP, so he's got a lot of experience there. So he's very interesting. He's got some good tips on, social media marketing and some of these other things. So definitely have some questions there prepared if you want to pick his brain on all of that. And with that, if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I will see you next week for our last session, and we'll continue from there.
Thanks, everybody, for attending today. Really appreciate it. And again, if you have any questions, we'll be here for another couple of minutes if you want to ask them.
Just a quick question on being able to view the webinars again. I'd like to share them with my team. Is that something I can do relatively easily?
Yeah, Mark, we'll be sending out the recordings after the last session, so you'll be getting them all at once.
Excellent. Yeah, very helpful. Thanks to David and David.
No Great. Problem. Well, watch next week for the other Dave.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.